Hello? Hello, are you there? Hi. This is episode 298 of Stand Up. Joining me today, Dr. Aaron Carroll and comedian Jay Black. My name is Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Yeah, we are off, and I am so happy to have you listening to today's show because I just wanted to take a minute here at the top and say something about the show in hopes to get your insight and your input in it. So basically, the goal now for the show with where it's at in February of 2021 is to do a daily show where I open up with a really good, helpful scooping of news of what happened the day before, using sound to help illustrate it, reading tweets and giving my own analysis to help color it and make it more interesting. And then I do a quicker news segment called, of course, the news dump, which is more rapid fire headlines that aren't politics and COVID. And then the goal is in the third part of the show, or maybe third and fourth segments of the show, is to interview two guests. The goal is to have that first opening and interview two guests each day. And then what kind of guests? Here's the ideal show in my mind, and I really want to know what you guys think because you listen to it, and so I'm doing it for you. I like to have a smart conversation about an important issue or policy or problem with someone who knows what the hell they're talking about. And I like to have an intimate, more thoughtful conversation, maybe with someone, more personal conversation with someone else who's good at talking about their own intimate problems and issues and how they've dealt with them. That's kind of my ideal show. It's kind of like the conversations that a lot of thoughtful folks have with each other one-on-one that you like to listen to in other podcasts and television and radio shows. And then the more policy, more wonky, more academic conversation done, of course, in my way. And that's really what I'm trying to do every day. I don't nail that every day. Sometimes it's two policy people. Every once in a while, it's two more personal conversations. And every once in a great while, I don't even do the news segment because I'm running late or whatever. But I've been pretty consistent at it. The point is, that's what I'm going for. Sometimes I'll even only have one guest because of booking issues or something. But generally, that's what I'm going for. And so I just wanted to I've already taken too much time. That was supposed to last 2 minutes, and now I'm already into 3. To just throw out, that's what I'm trying to do every day. It's a daily podcast. I'm going to start calling it Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily or Stand Up Daily just as a marketing and promotion tool because most podcasts are not every single day. But that's what I do with my days. I work really hard at making this podcast every day in hopes that people will enjoy it and support it with a subscription. That's why I do it every day. It's not a side gig. It's not a side hustle. It's my main gig. I'm in my shed. I'm interviewing folks and I put it all together myself. I edit it. I host it. Of course, I book it. I think that's where the real value comes in, and I need your support. So for those of you who are supporting this podcast with as little as a $5 subscription, or many of you have, quote, edited your pledge up, amazing. Cannot thank you enough. So great to have you in this community that we're building. If you haven't already, I would love to have you support this podcast and enjoy and get as much out of it as I do hosting and producing it each and every day. Can't do it without you. It's free for anybody, but it costs a lot in terms of time and work and my network and making this all happen and booking it and editing it and hosting it and promoting it. So right now I've got one paid sponsor that is givewell.org, which I'm really excited to be working with. I have not put the show out to get the more typical sponsors that you hear on other podcasts. I may do that. I may not right now. I'd really like to keep working on promoting the subscription base and having real people support this show that we learn from every day. Thank you so much for enduring this promotional kind of self-serving for the show opening. And by the way, the other thing that you really do need to do to grow a podcast like this is you need to post everywhere on all social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and now Clubhouse. You need to be involved in all of those. And that is something I'm working really hard on figuring out and being involved with. But I also just don't want to be connected to a screen all the time. So it's a balance, and hopefully I'll be able to hire someone soon to help me with posting the content that I host and edit and produce every day, because it's a lot of time. So if you're into social media or know someone who is in social media strategy and marketing, by all means, send me your resume. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Now, I've got two great guests joining me today, and they're just the perfect kind of show, because I had this really thoughtful, intimate, open, vulnerable discussion with Jay Black, who lost his father and his brother within months. His marriage was crumbling. He was abusing drugs and alcohol, signed himself into outpatient therapy, and has really turned it around. He's a very successful comedian who I admire and like, and I think he's so funny, and I was so happy to have this conversation, which is also funny, very funny at times, but super thoughtful. Jay's a great guy. I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation with him. And of course, before that, Dr. Aaron Carroll, who is pretty much my favorite person to talk to, one of my favorite all-time human beings, probably the most brilliant person I've ever met in my life. He is on the show today, of course, to talk about all things coronavirus, COVID-19, the vaccines, policy, and even a little bit of conversation about the Mars rover. But first, let's get to the last 24 hours in news in the segment I call The Last 24. And a lot happening yesterday in Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill. You had all kinds of different hearings. You can forgive yourself if you can't quite catch up and follow it all. Let me just recap the 36th day of Joe Biden's presidency by saying yesterday, House Democrats said they are going to pass, hopefully, the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill by this Friday. Everybody's getting a check. The FDA said Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine has met the requirements for emergency use authorization, so that's great. Also, the Biden administration is going to make 25 million masks available for free for Americans at community health centers and food banks. That's great. Two Senate committees postponed Neera Tanden's confirmation hearing because they didn't like the names that she had called some of their colleagues in the past. And by the way, they then called her names. Just the most unbelievable gaslighting we've seen so far, I think. The Biden administration also expect to release a very important U.S. intelligence report that is not going to make the Saudi royal family happy or more friendly, which is probably the right thing to do. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. That's what this intelligence report apparently alleges. And yesterday, a reporter asked Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader, who is a big supporter of Donald Trump's, if Donald Trump should be speaking at CPAC. He said yes. Then she asked Liz Cheney, and she said no. Here it is.
Do you believe President Trump should be speaking, or former President Trump should be speaking at CPAC this weekend?
Yes, he should.
Congresswoman Cheney?
That's up to CPAC. I've been clear in my views about President Trump and the extent to which following January 6th, I don't believe that he should be playing a role in the future of the party or the country.
On that high note, thank you all very much.
Oh, it was so good. You got to see it. It was so awkward and so amazing. And the future of the Republican Party is not in question. The Republican Party is Donald Trump's party still. And anybody who still counts himself a Republican is not a supporter of Donald Trump is in the big minority. I don't think there's much of an argument for that. All right, moving on. I think that it's super important, very big news that we're about to get rescued. That's right. House Democrats are going to pass a $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill by this Friday, setting up the Senate to approve the bill with a simple majority and send it to Joe Biden by the middle of March. March 14th is the goal. That's when several unemployment programs are set to expire. Now, a ruling from the Senate parliamentarian is expected to determine whether this giant rescue plan will allow a $15 an hour minimum wage increase and using what's called budget reconciliation rules. And so that is hard to understand. It doesn't matter. We'll soon find out what the parliamentarian referee decides and whether or not they're going to be able to get that in. That wasn't an edit. I just said be able to very quickly twice. Anyway, more than 150 American companies urged congressional leaders to pass this immediate and large-scale federal legislation to address the health and economic crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. They went on to say more must be done to put the country on a trajectory for a strong, durable recovery. The point is, this package has overwhelming support from Wall Street to Main Street to corporate America to small businesses. Very, very popular. It's only not popular to Republicans, mostly in Congress and in the media, who are screaming that government shouldn't be giving out money and all this bullshit. Economists understand the importance of this. And if you don't understand anything about economics, you get what's happening. People aren't able to go to work and be able to produce things and make money. And it's been this way for almost a year now. Here is Senator Bernie Sanders, who is also the chairman on the Budget and Management Committee, I think it's called. And he was on All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC last night. And Chris basically asked him, have you ever seen anything that's this popular and has this much support? And Bernie Sanders, I think he gives a pretty good detailed answer, some of the Bernie Sanderisms in here, but I think this was worth sharing. Here he is, Senator Bernie Sanders on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night.
Absolutely. I mean, for once, I think we are listening to the American people in this extraordinary time of need. 2020 was probably the worst year in American history since the Civil War. People are suffering. They can't feed their children. They have no income, worried about being evicted. Their kids can't go to school. Mental illness is at a record-breaking level because of all of the anxiety and isolation that people are feeling. And we have presented a comprehensive bill, which is not perfect, but goes a long way to say to working families all over this country, you know what? We hear your pain, and we are responding. We're going to get you that $1,400 check for every working class adult. That's a family of four, $5,600 on top of the $600 checks they received last month. That is life and death for millions of families. We're going to extend unemployment benefits until September with a $400 bonus on top of your normal unemployment. We are going to lower, this is an issue we don't talk about enough, Chris. Childhood poverty in America is way, way up there compared to other major countries. This legislation lowers childhood poverty by 50%. We're going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. That is why the American people support what we're doing. We're listening to their pain. We're responding.
All right, Bernie Sanders, there he is. We'll see what happens with the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill, but we're looking at a target date of March 14th. So also want to play with you some of the fireworks that came out of Capitol Hill. I forget which hearing this is, but Congressman Jim Jordan was being a dick. And then Congressman Gerald Connolly of Virginia, Democrat, had enough of it. And here's a quick, this has got one edit in it. I forget where I got this from, but this is from yesterday on Capitol Hill. Congressman Gerald Connolly losing his mind on Jim with the G, Jordan. And I'm here for it. Hopefully you are.
It was Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, who was planting the idea, aided and abetted by disruptive changes proposed by a new postmaster general and a compliant board of governors that actually eroded public confidence in the ability to vote by mail. That wasn't a Democratic narrative. That was a Republican narrative by the President of the United States and his enablers. I didn't vote to overturn an election. And I will not be lectured by people who did about partisanship.
Oh, I love that. I love the way he said that. I also love the tone of his voice, that guy. It just sounds like a TV character, Congressman Gerald Connolly. But that turn of phrase, that refrain, that I will not be lectured by, it is an arrogant thing to say generally, and it's almost always used in a hostile manner, I think. But I loved the way that he just used it there, and I wish it would be employed more by Democratic congressmen. So moving on, there's also a hearing looking into the insurrection of January 6th and everything that led up to it. And here is just some sound from two congresswomen, Sheila Jackson Lee and Val Demings.
On January 6th, former President Trump directed a group of his followers, which included an array of hate-filled extremists, to attack the Capitol and Congress at a time when we were fulfilling our sacred constitutional duty in certifying electors. There are no both sides in this debate. We must not be misled by efforts to divert the attention and accountability for these acts of right-wing violence and terror.
Aren't we tired? Aren't we as a nation exhausted? Haven't we had enough? Doesn't this issue deserve more than a political debate, a lackluster and half-hearted response? And if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to keep score, you will lose.
Oh, I love these tough congresswomen, and I'm really happy to have shared that little clip with you. I think it's worth mentioning. I almost want to open everyday show with it to remind people that a majority of Republican congressmen voted to overturn a Democratic election in order to replace the guy who won the election legitimately, according to the guy who lost the election experts themselves. They wanted to replace the loser with the winner. And by doing that, they rallied the country and their supporters around a cause, the big lie, that led to a violent insurrection on the Capitol. I want to say that every single day. A majority of Republican members voted to overturn a Democratic election in order to install the loser over the winner. Heard Chris Hayes also say something like that last night, and so I'm cribbing it from him. But everybody's saying that the same way, and it's just important, I think, to keep repeating and reminding so that when we're dealing with those specific Republican congressmen and others who have sold the big lie, that's the only thing that matters. Nothing else matters. Nothing else that they care about, that they're talking about, that they're arguing about, that they're criticizing, even if it's fair, matters, because they are still standing by the big lie that led to the insurrection on the Capitol. And you heard from Congresswoman Val Demings there. She's a former police chief, I think from Florida, is it? I'll look it up while I'm playing this clip. Anyway, she was on with Chris Hayes last night as well, and he asked her what she learned from the hearing.
What I've learned today is that we've been dealing with domestic terrorism, white supremacy since the founding of our country, and that we still are dealing with white supremacists and domestic terrorism, and that there are those who will continue to defend those who are directly responsible. You know, when we talk about Insurrection Day, we know that that was the direct result of the actions of the former president who helped to incite the attack against the Capitol. But unfortunately, many of my colleagues on this subcommittee and across the aisle in general have done everything within their power to continue to carry the big lie and the false narrative and not address the problems in this country that we have faced way too long. And that is, again, domestic terrorism, white supremacy, and extreme domestic individuals.
Yeah, now we're telling the truth. Been talking about this for years. I'm so happy to have it be in the mainstream of the conversation. This is where we've needed to be for a long time on this conversation with the white supremacist threat, the domestic terrorism threat here in the United States of America. But because it's not really seen by so many Americans, especially us white folks, until fairly recently, unfortunately, we haven't talked about it. Well, now we are. And speaking of which, I think this next and final clip does relate to it. Did I say the last clip was last? All right, well, I got to play. Oh, by the way, Val Demings, Florida, 10th District. Sorry. Some of you are probably yelling at me. But this is from yesterday. There was a hearing as well on disinformation, House subcommittee hearing on media disinformation, mainly on cable news. And Soledad O'Brien was one of the witnesses invited to speak. And I tried to cut up her opening statement, just edited it up and give you the best parts. But the entire thing in the way that which she delivers it, the professional broadcaster and speaker that she is, was so good that I just had to leave the whole thing in. I've listened to it, watched it twice, and it's worth it both times. Here she is, Soledad O'Brien.
Chairman, thank you to the members of the committee and, of course, those who joined me in testifying. Back in 2005, CNN aired a piece on Lou Dobbs Tonight reporting that the U.S. had 7,000 new cases of leprosy in the previous 3 years because of unscreened illegal immigrants. That figure was completely false. Back then, the official leprosy statistics showed about 7,000 cases of leprosy over the last 30 years, not 3. But Dobbs' lie advanced his agenda of demonizing undocumented immigrants, so it stuck. And he got away with it. To those of us at CNN reporting on the communities that he degraded, it was disheartening and insulting, and it was also only the beginning. We had entered an era where broadcasters would begin repeating and re-energizing lies and liars, an era that would set the stage for xenophobic and racist narratives that would take hold and polarize this country. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, reporting and anchoring for local TV, network news, cable, places like NBC, WBZ TV, HBO Real Sports, CNN, Hearst. I do a podcast on Quake Media, documentaries, series for my own production company. And so my point is that I have my feet very firmly planted on the media landscape. And this is what the landscape looks like to me. Media, disguised as journalism, has been spreading lies for years, elevating liars and using the ensuing slugfest to chase ratings, hits, subscriptions, advertisers. Period. Full stop. So how do we get here? Michael Rich, who is the CEO of the RAND Corporation, where I'm honored to serve on the board, defines what happened as truth decay, the diminishing role of facts and analysis in public life, in important conversations about policy issues, policy decisions, and elections. And I believe this era of truth decay began when local newspapers were badly, even mortally wounded by the emergence of free social media and the decline of advertising dollars like classified ads. Our country has lost almost 2,100 papers since 2004. Local news is the heartbeat of American journalism, the glue of civic participation, the place where we turn to for information about our local taxes, quality education, infrastructure, and that demise left the public with only the unfiltered and unverified cauldron of presumed fact and opinion that is social media. The public turned to TV for traditional reporting, especially on politics, where 65% of Americans report trusting information from TV and radio, depending on whether the stations conform to their political leanings. But here's the problem. TV didn't fill the void of in-depth reporting on America's communities by producing stories about policies that affect regular people. Instead, it became a place where facts often go to die. TV, cable news in particular, relies on the cheap and easy booking of talking heads who exchange colorful barbs, entertaining outbursts, and sometimes peddle outright fiction. It's only gotten worse as reporters and anchors chase ratings, toss aside objectivity to divide us into false categories, I believe, of left and right, manipulating facts and debating the liars they booked for their very own shows. Today, viewers who come looking for information instead get enraging and contradictory facts from an endless churn of guests who are not in the least representative of the public. On Meet the Press, Face the Nation, and This Week, back in 2015, 80% of the guests were white, 12% were women, 2% were women of color, 41% were Republican, 22% were Democrats. All of this has eroded the public trust. 72% of Americans said they trusted the media back in 1976. By 2020, that number had fallen to 40%. So why did the media march down this road? Money. News organizations need cheap way to draw big ratings, and big ratings mean more ad dollars, and it's really just that simple. And when news organizations make decisions based on ratings rather than responsible reporting, disinformation flourishes in dangerous ways. Important conversations are clouded, scrutiny is reduced, trust in our institution erodes. So what to do about all this? Let me be clear that Congress cannot and should not regulate journalism in defiance of the First Amendment. But here's what we can do. Don't book liars or advance lies. cover the fact that lies and propaganda are being disseminated, but do not book people to lie on your show because it elevates them and presents a lie as another side. Stop posing every story as having two sides. Some stories, in fact, have many, many sides and are more complicated. And also, lies don't have a side. Take the time to unravel and report and give history and context. We, as reporters, are verifiers. Every perspective does not deserve a platform. Media thrives on the open exchange of ideas, but that doesn't mean you have to book a neo-Nazi every time you book someone who is Jewish. Balance does not mean giving voice to liars, to bigots, and to kooks. Stop saying you want a diverse staff and go hire one. Fast. The public will trust you again if you tell the truth about who lives in this country and report accurately on communities. Recognize that objectivity means having an open mind, not a lack of judgment. If you do not call a lie or racism, you empower the liar. You empower the racist. Support efforts to challenge media that disseminates misinformation, particularly in vulnerable communities. And most importantly, support ground level reporting, journalism, the place, in fact, where major networks and cable news gets a lot of its best stories. America trusts the media to deliver accurate, factual, unbiased information. It's the grist of democracy. It's the stuff that enables us to have intelligent and accurate conversations with our neighbors, to cast informed votes and make thoughtful and intelligent decisions. Thank you very much.
Oh, my goodness gracious. I loved it. And those are the same principles that I am hosting this podcast every day with. This podcast is supported by subscribers, by you, by the listener. I believe so much in so much of what she just said. It's real hard to make millions of dollars that you need in ad revenue, especially by being boring. It's real hard. That is why cable news does what it does. That's why everybody does what they do, to get your attention, to listen to them, to watch them, to support them. What I am trying to do is learn as well. That's what I've always wanted to do with this show, is learn. I am learning stuff. I'm learning things each and every day from the smartest people in the world, including today with Dr. Aaron Carroll, yesterday with Jonathan Cohn, earlier this week, Heather McGee and Dr. Michael Mann. These are the smartest people in our country, and they speak with me and let me hit record. That is what you are supporting this show for. We have long-form conversations with a lot of detail and nuance and granules, with bits and pieces, with nooks and crannies. Nooks and crannies of information. That's what we're doing. We're learning from people who know stuff because they've spent their entire lives and careers looking at the stuff. And then, most importantly for me, and I think for you, they know how to talk about the stuff that they're experts on. They're good at talking about it. They're good at having conversations. And I'm pretty good at asking the right questions at the right times. And also often bad at it, which is why you like the show, because I'm very honest about myself, I think, and transparent about myself, and will always be happy to share about myself and what I think about the things. Okay, so hope I didn't lose you. Got one more clip for you. I just found this one. It's on the ground. I grabbed it earlier and it took me a while, so I might as well play it. This is from a Bloomberg show. It's on the Bloomberg network. And they had John Bolton on. And I think, going back to what Soledad just said, why? Why would you have John Bolton on? And here's why you don't have John Bolton on, ever. Because John Bolton was one of the architects, inspirations, and cheerleaders for the Iraq War. And the Iraq War was the worst foreign policy disaster of our entire lives. And he was all about it and stands by it and still is not admitted. One of the few who supported it and hasn't changed his tune on it. Okay? That's John Bolton. He also wants a war with Iran real bad. Donald Trump hired him because he liked him on TV. They didn't get along, and then Trump fired him, and John Bolton should never be invited onto your show. That's what I believe. But if you do, if I were to compromise and say there's something to learn from him, and this is an entertaining anecdote that we learn from him, but listen where it ends. Listen to the final question that the anchor, Tim Stenovic at Bloomberg, asks in this short clip from Bloomberg with John Bolton as their guest.
According to the documentary, President Trump offered Kim Jong-un a ride home on Air Force One. Were you present for that alleged invitation? And if you were, what was your response?
Well, I was there and I heard it, and I didn't respond at all because I was biting my tongue to avoid saying what I thought the response should be. It was a typical Trump offer on the spur of the moment. He thought it would be really cool to take Kim to back home to Pyongyang. He didn't think about any of the potential consequences or anything else. I think Kim was as taken aback as I was. That may have been a rare moment of agreement between the two of us. And Hanoi, unfortunately, he said no, so we never had to worry about the consequences.
Well, so let's talk Iran here. Same question as with North Korea. What should President Biden do when it comes to Iran?
No! 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 He doesn't get to answer that question. He doesn't get to. No, he's disqualified. You're disqualified, John Bolton, from commenting on or influencing foreign policy. If you aren't a war criminal, and I don't know about such legal things, and so I don't throw them out onto the microphone. But if you aren't, you definitely are wrong about everything when it comes to foreign policy. In the next week or two, I'm going to be interviewing a young man named Steve Kiernan, who is a Marine who fought in Fallujah and got blown up and lost his legs. And that's why John Bolton shouldn't be asked what Joe Biden should be doing in Iran. That's why. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to this young man. I talked to him the other day for a while, but I'm going to tape the next conversation because he's got a lot to say about his life and what he learned and what has happened to him as a Marine veteran who fought in Fallujah, Iraq, and what he learned. Looking forward to that. All right, but now I am looking forward to sharing with you what we call affectionately the news dump.
Florida man is in a slump for my beer. It's time for the news dump. Yeah.
Jesus, what was in that toilet? A box of donuts, Pete? It's can we hear the toilet again? It's Pete Coe and his son Theo on drums. Submit your news dump jingles to standupwithpete@gmail.com and everything else as well. And that's your cue to play the news bed music, Keith. This new fake producer is a little slow on some of these cues. All right, let's start with the poll, shall we? A new Gallup poll released on Wednesday has found that more Americans now identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender than ever before. Not this one. I am so super straight. Yeah, strictly dickly. Oh, wait. This Gallup poll released Wednesday, 5.6% of United States adults identified as LGBT. That's up from 4.5% based on the company's 2017 data. In 2012, when Gallup began tracking the measure, the number was 3.5%. Now, how about that? That's interesting. People identify sexually. Always an interesting conversation as things change. I mean, our generation of teenagers right now and the more progressive, less evangelical areas of this country think it's cool now. I mean, I think sometimes kids are almost lying because it's not a bad thing anymore. Bruce Springsteen, I mean, it's still a bad thing in a lot of places. I don't mean to minimize that. It's still tough to be gay. building myself a hole. Bruce Springsteen pled guilty to consuming alcohol in a closed area. I don't really care about that story. I'm not even sure why I mention it. A former aide says Andrew Cuomo kissed her and talked to her, tried to suggest playing strip poker with her. Former member of his administration, she'd already accused him of sexual harassment. I think it's just this one woman accusing him, but he's offered new details about her claims against him. And Andrew Cuomo, the governor of my state, he really does seem like a bully and a creep. I mean, doesn't seem like a great guy. I think that's pretty clear. I'm not sure if people care about that, if he saves them from coronavirus, but he certainly didn't save the people in those nursing homes. And I haven't really been following that story closely enough, but I'm looking forward to the investigation and getting to the bottom of it. Venomous spiders have prompted a temporary shutdown of the library in Michigan. Do you want to hear this one? It might creep some of you out too much. I'm just going to skip it because I don't want people to be afraid of nature and spiders. What do you got next, Keith? Hand me another one. All right, what's this? No, we're not doing Keith. We don't do COVID, politics, and I really try not to do dead kid stories in the news dump. I'm not looking for those clicks. I don't think. I think they get in people's heads too much, so let's not do those. Those are the rules. What else you got? Oh, a drug story? Yeah, we like that. This one is from Europe. Germany finds a huge cocaine shipment and a second shipment seized in Belgium. Authorities say German customs officials have found more than 16 metric tons of cocaine in containers that arrived in Hamburg from Paraguay. So where is this cocaine coming from? Very interested in following up with that one. Read more at ABC News. All right, what's this? A record being broken? Okay, I'll do this one. A free diver has shattered the record for longest swim under the ice. How about that? Guy's name is David Venkel, and he not only broke the human record for the longest swim under ice this week, he made it further than any polar bear on record. The Czech swimmer wore only swim trunks and goggles Tuesday when he swam underneath ice for almost 266 feet in disused quarry northeast of Prague, according to CBS. Reuters reports that the 38-year-old said, quote, "This will do," after emerging from water whose temperature measured 37 degrees Fahrenheit. The previous record of 250 feet was set by Denmark's Stig Avel Severinsen in 2017. No word on what Stig Avel Severinsen feels about the record being broken by David Venkel, but I bet you Stig is pissed. He's going to come back. My money is on Stig Avel Severinsen over David Venkel, because I like the Danish. Matter of fact, you know what? I think I'm going to reach out to old Stig and see if I can get him on the show and ask him a few questions. That would be a hilarious bit. just ask the other guy how he feels about losing his record of swimming under the ice. What a hilarious rivalry these two now have. Okay, so that is your news dump. How about that? How about we wrap it up there? How about it's been already almost 38 minutes of this opening news segment, and I'm very, very excited to get to the meat of this episode, which is my first guest. That is Dr. Aaron Carroll. Speaking of meat, guy loves to eat it and cook it, and has a lot of thoughts about its nutritional value, by the way. Get his book, The Bad Food Bible. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, which is a huge hit. It's award-winning, his YouTube channel. It won a journalism award, as a matter of fact. I think it beat the Washington Post. This is a couple of years ago now. But the YouTube channel is called Healthcare Triage. He, of course, is on Twitter at Aaron E. Carroll, and he is at Indiana University, where his official job title is Health Services Investigator. He is also, though, basically in charge of, I don't know what the official title is, in charge of mitigation at Indiana University of COVID. And they have had an amazing record as a result of him, and he's been given a very prestigious award recently because of it. One of the youngest, I think the youngest professor at IU to maybe ever get this recognition. Anyway, get his books, The Bad Food Bible, and all of his books debunking myths about your body and your health. Read him at the New York Times, where he's a contributor. One of the smartest, one of the best, and I'm not sure I needed to give him this introduction because most of you already know him. So Dr. Aaron E. Carroll joins me now. What does the E stand for, and why did you originally? Why did you include it into your Twitter handle originally? Was it a hard choice?
So when you write papers and you get them published in like PubMed for the peer-reviewed literature, then the way that you're always referred to when you want to look up the author is I'd be A.E. Carroll. And so it's just habit that I felt like if people wanted to be able to look for me and find me in the literature, that they need to know my middle initial. That's literally the only reason why.
I would imagine that's the same reason why another guest of mine who's a scientist and a PhD, Michael E. Mann, did that, right?
Yeah, because if you just look up A. Carroll, you'll find a gazillion people. So like to narrow it down to get my stuff, you need to be able to know you got to look for A.E. Carroll.
You have been very excited about the Mars rover on social media. Yeah. If not for your tweets, I wouldn't have watched the video of its landing. I felt embarrassed I hadn't seen it earlier. But why are you so interested in this Mars rover mission? And how long have you been following? Did you watch it all the way through space?
I remember like taking off, and I remember I'd check in for updates every once in a while, and I knew it was going to be landing on the day that it did. But I was not like obsessively following it. But I've always been somewhat fascinated, like from the Earth to the Moon, that HBO series from, I don't even know how far back, was like my favorite thing for a long time. I still love rewatching it every once in a while. The idea that like, first of all, first there's the just aspect of like the idea that people get together and like set a vision and then do whatever it takes to accomplish it, working together is spectacular. But still, the science behind it, the idea that we put a hunk of metal on a rocket and we shot it off, and then 9 months later, we landed on another planet a gazillion miles away, pretty much exactly where we want. I mean, can you imagine? Like, that's just, it's a miracle. And it's one of those things, you look at that and then I get upset that, well, if we can do that, why can't we do so many more basic things? But yeah. I mean, truly, it's a freaking miracle. It's just staggering in the idea, like what we can accomplish.
The reason why we can do that is seemingly fairly simple. The resources are mostly there, and there's a team that works very well with each other to be able to have these successful space missions. In the United States of America, we have a society where we don't work very well together. And let me bring up what has gone on in Israel or certain other countries in terms of the way that they work collectively towards something like NASA does, the Mars rover. Is that not the answer to your question? We don't work well together.
We can. I mean, we clearly do. I mean, we did launch the Mars rover. It's just we often feel like we don't.
But as a society,
I think we've cultivated that. I think politically we've also cultivated that mentality where it's become much more antagonistic. So it's problematic in the public sphere to try to get that kind of, or hard to get that attitude of like, we're all in this together, we're all working together. I do see it. I see it all the time. I see it locally. I just don't feel like it's existing very much in our public life, which is depressing.
And when it comes to our public life, it means the way that we wear masks and the way that we are able to cooperate with a lockdown. So you tweeted, everyone focuses on Israel's vaccination distribution success, which is real, but too many ignore how strong their accompanying lockdown has been. The latter will massively help them get back to normal. We're not doing anything like that. So on the lockdowns, what have we gotten right and what have we gotten wrong? And we have revolutions in this country over lockdowns at state houses with guns.
I think partially that's part of the problem is that like we just can't seem to get our act together to act collectively. But what I was talking about with Israel is that, everybody's pointing to the fact that, oh my gosh, they're vaccinated, they're suppressing the disease and they're going to get to normal life much sooner. And they're saying like, look, vaccines will get us there. And I'm like, what I don't think people get is that like vaccines will get us to herd immunity someday. But if case levels are still high, it will still take us time to suppress everything down. Like they're not going to come down overnight. That's not how herd immunity works. what's bringing Israel down is not just the massive vaccination, but also the fact that they've been in massive lockdown to prevent spread and bring everything down simultaneously, so that like they keep levels low while they're getting to herd immunity. That's the method for success. We just don't often seem to have the appetite. But this is how we look at health policy all the time. Like, we want dessert without broccoli, or we want dessert without vegetables. We just want, we think that there's an easy way to get the stuff that we want without also taking the accompanying trade-offs and stuff we don't want. If you want, to get the stuff that works, you got to take often everything that goes along into making that happen.
I wonder what that is, if it's generational or if it's cultural. The wanting things for nothing or very quickly or for little. I wonder if it's generational or cultural.
I wish I had a good answer for you. I do think that sometimes we have cultivated this idea that this American exceptionalism to the point where people think that like the rules don't apply to us, or that that they're easier, simpler. That there's always a cheap, easy, simple way to get what you want. You just got to figure it out. When sometimes that's just not true. Sometimes the method is clear, but it will require sacrifice, and we're just sometimes not very good at that.
Good answers. You also tweeted, sticking with your Twitter feed, you tweeted, "I lost my father and will likely lose my mother soon due to COVID. Neither contracted the virus. Killing your spirit sometimes kills your body too." And then you suggested folks read this piece from the New York Times titled, "We are going to keep you safe even if it kills your spirit." Aaron, I know, because we're good friends, what's been going on with your mom and dad. I'm not sure that you had mentioned that publicly anywhere. If you did, I missed it. Why are you revealing that now?
Well, there was some really, really good article in the New York Times. I think it was New York Times Magazine this weekend. I read it online. That was about how dementia care is going through the pandemic, and how difficult that is for any number of reasons, because you have to keep reorienting people to the horror that exists, or because lack of human contact is a terrible thing. But I might have mentioned before, my father passed away in November, and he didn't have COVID, but this year has just destroyed him, and what was left of his fragile mental stability to begin with eroded, because my mother's in memory care. She has Alzheimer's. She went into memory care October or November of 2019. And she was reasonably functional then, but she's been declining. But COVID hit, they locked down her center, just like they did all over the country. My dad could not see her much anymore, which was one of his few trying to do FaceTime with my mother was difficult. And I think it just accelerated his depressive state to such an extent that what might have been a relatively minor injury he couldn't overcome it, and passed away. And then my mother has continued to be in memory care with all that comes with that and the lockdowns and everything else. And her decline has been so rapid, it's hard to believe. And so she went from reasonably functional in September, fall of 2019, to where I'm not sure how much longer she's going to be with us. And again, she didn't catch COVID, but the pandemic and everything that came with it clearly accelerated everything that exists and will likely lead to her eventual early decline, her early demise. So it's just I thought it was a great article, but I just think too, it's we fixate on this number, 500,000, and we're that's the number of people we can record that actually died of virus. The horror and the outcomes of this pandemic are so much greater, and even the number of deaths are going to be so much greater than what we can actually quantify. And it's hard. It's hard for everybody. It's hard.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying all that and you sharing that and talking about it on Twitter, but it's well said. Killing your spirit sometimes kills your body too. I think people often think of you. I know I often think of you as this guy who demands scientific evidence for all of his conclusions, but I think that makes us forget the part of you that can see what's right in front of you in terms of the things that can't be measured. In this case, killing your spirit, depression, loneliness.
Well, yeah, and it's it's just there's so many ways that this translates into to horror in the United States. And I just don't think we've come to grips with the massive hit that this country has taken and likely will take for some time because of the pandemic. And we sometimes, again, we fixate on the stuff we can measure, but that doesn't mean that what we really need to know about isn't there. It's just harder to measure.
So you've got this great piece at the New York Times. Your most recent piece at the New York Times is about the myths about coronavirus, and you've of course written about the vaccine. Forgive me. You've written a bunch of books debunking myths. And what would you say is the most common? Is there a most common myth or misconception, or is it too hard to land on one?
No, with the vaccine, it's like what blew me away is that the question I get asked the most is there's like this real rumor that somehow this hurts women's fertility. And this is the one that I get from tons of like parents and tons of students and friends all the time. From what I can gather, there's a German, I think it was a politician. If you get vaccinated,
just to be clear, if you get vaccinated as a young person before you even want to get pregnant or before you ever get pregnant, it will make it harder to get pregnant. So
so it's like the science, like an ex-Pfizer employee or someone. I mean, he wasn't fired. Somebody used to work for Pfizer, and a German doctor, politician. Basically, what they were arguing was that the spike protein that we create antibodies against with the vaccine was similar to a spike protein that exists on the placenta that sort of helps with the placenta, grabbing on, binding to the uterus. And therefore, if we gave people a vaccine, that we create antibodies to this spike protein that would later fight off the placenta and would hurt fertility. Of course, you don't need a vaccine to create antibodies to the spike protein. That's what your body does anyway when you get coronavirus. So if this were true, then getting coronavirus would also affect your ability to get pregnant later because you build antibodies up to your own placenta. But none of it matters. It doesn't even forget all of that. It's not the same spike protein. It's not the same. The immunity to one doesn't affect the other. And so it's just not true that getting the vaccine is affecting women's pregnancy. And we didn't see any problems in the trials when pregnant women slipped through. We're not seeing any real problems as many pregnant women are getting vaccinated right now, nor is there any theoretical reason to support that this is true. But it's pervasive and it's out there a lot. And so it's probably the one I hear the most.
Then another one that we hear and have heard often throughout time, in arguments against vaccines, but certainly, and fair enough, the question about the speed in which the vaccine was developed is a fair question, especially for people who don't have any idea about how long it takes to develop a vaccine. But I'll go ahead and decide I trust people like you and Peter Hotez and other people who understand these things. So the trials were too rushed, Dr. Carroll. That is another myth that you take on in your most recent piece in New York Times, which everybody can read.
Yeah. I mean, for any variety of reasons, I start with the idea, and I think I even literally say this, is the more scientists were working on this one problem at the same time that have likely ever focused on any one problem at the same time in the history of man. This was the biggest, most focused scientific endeavor we might have ever had worldwide. So lots of people are working on this. We should expect some level of success. But it's also important to know that, we have, the usual process. You have phase 1 trials, which are, tens of people, often to just start looking at safety. Phase 2 trials, which maybe hundreds of people, which also look at safety, but also start, picking people who have, risk factors for the disease to try and actually figure out, this is the population we're going to use it in. Maybe you look at some pharmacokinetics. Maybe you look at some, some kind of biologic response, are they creating antibodies? And then if everything still looks good, you get FDA approval, you move on to phase 3, randomized controlled trials, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. You're looking for efficacy and side effects, safety and efficacy still. All of those happened, but they were compacted because usually a drug company, because these trials are usually mega expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars, a lot of time. And so they do phase 1, and then they have to make a calculated decision. Is it worth our moving on to phase 2? Do we really think this drug is going to work? And so they go to FDA approval, which can be expensive. They get phase 2, they do that. And then they have to really think, do I do phase 3? Because again, super expensive. And if it doesn't get the results that we think we're going to get, we've wasted a lot of money and time. So should we take the gamble? There was no gambling this time. We were, the United States as well as other countries were willing to foot the bill for the trials. We were throwing billions at this problem.
Yeah.
And so all of the gamble went out the window. Not only did they do phase 1, they started phase 2 while they were reviewing the data for phase 1. They start phase 3 while they're reviewing the data for phase 2. They start producing the vaccine even while they're waiting for phase 3 results because they're so sure, like, this is a gamble worth taking. There's going to be a guaranteed market, lots of money at the end, and it's a good thing to do. And so they compacted it, but all of the stages happened. And also remember, like 100 companies got in on this, and only 2 have so far succeeded in the United States. The gauntlet is stopped the other 98 so far, so from getting through. And I hope another 1 or 2 cross the finish line. I really do. But those other companies that haven't made it to approval are evidence that the system works. You know, it's the ones that have made it through that are successful and are safe and effective, and they've been miraculously safe and effective.
That's such
we also saved some time at the beginning. A lot of the preclinical work, the animal studies, how do you use coronavirus in a vaccine, had already been done because of SARS. And because of work that we'd done for SARS, we had a lot of the grounding work ready to go. Plus, you know, scientists did the genetic sequencing of this gene and published it and posted it in January. And Moderna could go right to the web, see the genetic sequence, and start working on creating the mRNA for the spike protein. So a lot of stuff came together to make this happen in, let's say, 11 months, which is, I mean, frankly, awesome, and a testament, like the Mars rover, a testament to what we can accomplish. But again, it's like we only hear and focus on the successes. Lots of companies have failed or not yet succeeded as well.
Yeah, I love that point. I am often reminded the first time you ever told me when I said, Aaron, everybody where I live has Lyme's disease. And I'll never forget, you said, no, people just talk. People who get Lyme's, they will always tell you that they got it. So it seems like everybody got it because no one would be hanging out at a barbecue or whatever and be like, you know what? I don't have Lyme's.
Right, exactly.
No one will ever say.
What a great barbecue that would be.
No one ever says, you know what, my plan landed safely. Of course.
Yeah.
No one's ever like, the engine didn't fall off my plane.
Let me tell you the story. Yeah. Let me tell you the story of the time nothing happened on my flight to Vegas.
Right.
Let me tell you.
So you can read the rest of the myths about the coronavirus vaccine. We just covered 2 of the 7 at New York Times, linked in the show notes today. Also, Aaron has handled this in many different places. Of course, he takes these questions on his YouTube channel as well. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you the big question a lot of people are wondering right now. When do we get back to normal? I'm reading all the pieces and all the things and all the articles, and there seems to be windows. There seem to be people settling on windows, and most people are saying the summer is actually going to be very interestingly normal, but then it could get bad again in the fall and winter. So what is your answer to that?
This is the thing. People talk about normal like it's a binary switch. Like,
right.
What is normal? If normal is fall of 2019, I think it could be a while.
For me, it's walking into a bar and making out with anyone.
Well, that could be a while. But if like normal to me would be like, I'd like to be able to go and eat indoor at restaurants and take the vacations that I would otherwise normally take. And, maybe, go. I'd love to go to Disney World again. But it's like, but if they said to me like, oh, you can go to Disney World, but we might need you to wear a mask, I'd be like, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I just want to go to Disney World. I can wear a mask. But if somebody's like, no, it's not normal until like, I don't need to wear a mask and I can like lick everyone's face and not get COVID, I'd be like, well, then it might be some time. But we're going to get closer to what most people consider normal, I do believe, by summer, fall. And I think, when we're talking about specifically IU, it's like, I think we will definitely be approximating a more normal semester in fall of 2021 than we were in fall of 2020. But I won't promise that it will look exactly like fall of 2019. We may have consequences of this forever. Like if it's still endemic in times, you might have to, cases are rising. Everybody put on a mask for a couple of weeks. It's possible, but like I could live with that. Like I don't want deaths. I don't want hospitals full. I want, not to be, concerned all the time that I could, kill somebody who's elderly if we're all not very careful. I think we can get to much, much closer to normal. But if people's metric is, I don't ever want to think about COVID again, and I don't want to hear about it or care about it ever again, I'm like, it could be some time before we get there.
All right, final big quick question. There are about 24% of the U.S. population are kids. So what about vaccinating kids? If we need to get 80% vaccinated to reach herd immunity.
We'll get there eventually. But for two reasons. One, the studies haven't been done yet. They're being done right now. So we'll have more information on kids in the future. But it's also, we've taken a strategy in most states of, vaccinating in a risk profile, the most at risk down to the least at risk. Look, young kids and young adults are the ones who are least at risk when they're healthy. So even if the vaccine was approved today, we would be vaccinating no children because they're the lowest risk. In the same way, we're not vaccinating young, healthy 20-year-olds at the moment either. We're in a risk profile. So for a variety of reasons, kids will be among the last vaccinated, but when the time comes, I imagine we will. We tried to get, Noah and Sydney into a vaccine trial. We just, they filled up too fast. But the second they'll let me vaccinate my kids, I will.
Do you think pharmaceutical companies should put kids in these trials? And then if so, can we order the kids from Wayfair?
Well, kids are never first. Like, we should own that. It's for safety measures. Like, we test on adults first, then we move to kids. It's just everybody wants this done immediately. I don't think it's insane that they first, did the trial amongst, lower risk populations in general. Like, we didn't do pregnant women, we didn't do children. And then once that was approved, they moved on to do those kinds of trials. That seems fine.
I'm one of your fans who wants you to put out even more articles. What are you working on next, and when can I have it?
I've been pitching an article for, some time. I just want to write about cost sharing. There's a great new study out that showed that people who on Medicare, people who had slightly higher copays on their drugs stopped taking them and died more. And we're talking like tiny amounts. So I just think the way that we do deductibles and copays and everything in this country is silly, and we could be much better about it.
Thank you for your time. As always, I really appreciate you fitting me in your very busy schedule, sir.
Anytime.
All right. Dr. Aaron Carroll. Love when we get to talk. Follow him on Twitter at Aaron E. Carroll and tell him, hey, always appreciate it when you join Pete on Stand Up with Pete. Also, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Healthcare Triage. Read him at the New York Times. Visit him at his home in Indianapolis. I mean, I can't promise you he'll let you in, but I'm sure he'd love to say hello. Okay, so my next guest is, as I described earlier, the type of conversation where it's more intimate and more personal. I certainly could have that conversation with Aaron and have many times before. So sometimes there's a lot of both of it with the guests. But this is a very personal conversation with a really funny, insightful guy who I've known for most of my career as a comedian. We crossed paths a lot in New York, but he's had a great career as a writer as well as a comedian. He's also had a rough go of it personally in his life with losing his brother and his dad, as well as dealing with some serious issues with drugs and alcohol, apparently. I learned about all of it in this conversation with Jay Black, who, by the way, is so funny on Twitter. I absolutely love it. He tweets all about politics and current events, and he's great. JBlack.tv is his website, and he's on Twitter at JBlackIsFunny. Here's my conversation with an old friend, comedian Jay Black.
Pete Dominic, how are you?
Jay Black is funny.
Yeah. Well, I figure if I put it in there, people have to believe it.
There are several things I want to talk with you about, and I'm recording now, and we'll go for maybe can we go for like a half an hour or so?
You can listen. It's COVID time. You can have me until Friday.
That is so generous of you. But don't you have responsibilities to your family?
I've got 3 kids. The wife's got it. I think she's handling it okay. I am taking my son to Taco Bell right after this. Not a paid sponsor, anybody, but we're going through the drive-thru because he got a very good report from school today. So I'm rewarding him by damaging his innards.
You are rewarding your son's good grades with Taco Bell. I imagine that's his choice. My daughters, if we're going to talk about corporate chains, their choice is if they can go anywhere. Granted, it's very close. Is the Dunkin'? They love the Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, really? Are they coffee people or just the donuts?
Both. They both like the different, the wide selection of drinks. They like the donuts, and they like the diversity of the workforce that makes the food for them. They appreciate that.
I'll say this: I'm a Dunkin' guy through and through. I don't believe in Starbucks. I don't like that burnt coffee taste. I think if you grow up in the Northeast, Starbucks feels like it's like an interloper into our coffee drinking. I'm Dunkin' all the way.
It's a great way of describing. Those are feelings I've always had, but have never quite been able to articulate them that well. I got radicalized though in Italy with my wife's family. More towards a darker, and what that means is for me, I just do Dunkin' with no cream or sugar. That's what I do every single day of my life.
Gotcha. And that's fine. And, I spent a little bit of time in Italy. I did a tour with, not the USO, the Army. I did the Army bases in Italy. And the coffee there, it is, I know it sounds pretentious to say it, but it really does. It's like, well, how can you go back to regular coffee after that? It's so much. It's on a higher level.
It's interesting that this is all happening right now, this conversation, because I mean, this is going to seem so much like a bit, and I'm glad I do have the camera on me. The whole time we've been talking, just off of camera, I am holding a small cup that is holding Italian espresso.
Look at that. Yeah, we didn't plan this, guys. This wasn't done in Twitter DMs. This was just natural.
Well, speaking of DMs, sounds like you just got one.
I did. Let me see. Well, I accidentally set my notifications on. I just turned them off. So that was just someone liking one of my tweets.
I'm all into it. I like being liked, and if I had that alert, I think that would really affect me psychologically, because especially one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you and just have you on the podcast, because I'm such a fan of you on Twitter. Jay Black is funny at Jay Black is funny. Everybody follow Jay on Twitter right now, but that's dangerous. That's a dangerous type of dopamine hit, that kind of a like. But I guess it replaces live applause that you're used to.
Well, a little bit. So I'll say this. Twitter has been more of a replacement just in the getting to be clever category of life, which it's hard to explain to my wife, because she's like, why can't you just be clever for me? And it's like, well, believe me, I love when you love the stuff that I do. But in all honesty, sometimes I have thoughts that I don't think you'll appreciate, but that the Twitterverse will. And that's the dopamine hit there. I was off Twitter for like 4 years. I didn't do Twitter at all from right after Trump got elected, right up until February of 2020. I was off completely. And because I was in your mindset, the dopamine hit was great, but I was getting depressed, like reading the stuff. Like I was legitimately in a negative spot. And I talked to my therapist, and he was like, "Why are you on?" And I was like, "That's a good thought." So I got off.
So it wasn't. So reading Twitter, reading the news, and the way that you read it, nonstop kind of thing. However we do it, affected you. It wasn't your own tweets that were depressing you because they were poor in some way. You're saying
it was the two things. One, what you just said, the reading the news and watching sort of reality slide away from the universe was tough, because you can't. You're watching it, and you're like, it reminds me of remember that what was the Stephen King movie, The Langoliers, where the Langoliers would come out and eat reality in between the scenes. That's what the MAGAs are to me, just Langoliers with red hats eating reality, and that got to me. Like I would legitimately get there, and in my stupid narcissistic brain, I was like, if I could get the right tweet, I could fix this. All they have to do is see my clever tweet, and the red hats will all go, oh, yeah, no, you know what? I don't think this Trump guy's very good, and I'll fix it. But that never happened, and it depressed me.
Well, that's fascinating that you were off for that reason, that you were self-aware enough, that you talked about that with your therapist. I love all of that. But I got to say, I'm glad you're on, because whenever you got on, I must have discovered you on Twitter or become a fan of you on Twitter pretty quickly, because it's been about a year that I've been thoroughly enjoying your each and every tweet. I mean, you and I have known each other from stand-up for a long time. I don't want to make people think that I've just discovered you. I've always thought you're a great stand-up and have had a great deal for your career, your work, your act, the way that you've led your career, the actual hard work that you've put in year after year, and have just gotten better. You're one of those comedians who I think just keeps getting better, and I think that's fantastic. But Twitter's a different thing, and so is your own emotional bandwidth and your own mental health. So let me just ask you about that. How long have you been doing the therapist thing? I love that.
So like a lot of cliches, I was depressed clown stand-up, and that actually depressed me more than anything. It was like, oh, I'm exactly like everybody else. Like,
can you unpack that for civilians? Depressed clown stand-up.
I feel like, there's the cliche of comedians are, people think that backstage or in the green room, it's just a barrel of laughs and everybody high-fiving and enjoying life. But it's mostly just a bunch of bitter people on their phones staring at one another and sizing each other up, unless you're there with your friends. But, if you walk in a new place, it's a lot of, I would say we're like black widows. There can only be one in any room. But the way I break it down is this. If you're a comedian, you're observational, right? What do? You observe the world. Yeah. But when you observe the world, it's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle of comedy. You can't be part of the world. You can be one or the other. You can be observing it or you can be part of it. And I always described it as like people at concerts who get up and woo. Like they're the ones go, woo. The comedians aren't those people. No. Comedians are the people standing behind them going, what is this? Yeah. What is it? And that's fine. It turns into comedy that people laugh at and everybody enjoys. But I feel like we sort of miss out on a lot of the sacraments of life because we're watching them happen as they go on. And I think after, 5-6 years of doing that full time, I did what a lot of us do, which is drink a lot, do a lot of drugs, and get myself into a negative headspace. And I had to get out of it. So I took a few months off from comedy and went into an outpatient hospital and did group therapy for 6-8 weeks. And just real fast, I know I'm talking a lot. I just need to say this. Group therapy for a comedian, very difficult, because every time someone's giving their story, I'm like, I can punch that up for you. The ending doesn't work, but I'll help you.
So you weren't talking too much. I'm hanging on your every word. If I otherwise I'll jump in there and change gears. I love a lot of what you just said and the vulnerability and the way with which you said it, talking about missing out on the sacraments of life. That's very thoughtful wording. But can I ask you, I know we just jumped right into this topic here and it's personal, but was there a rock bottom? What role did your wife play in making a decision with you going into this outpatient? And what kind of how serious of an issue were the drugs and the alcohol? And how far down did you get, Jay?
I got, let me say this, not quite Don Jr. level, but close on, and by the way, I don't know if we can say that legally. We don't know, allegedly.
I think it is interesting if you have any kind of serious mental health struggle. We all have them in different ways and different spectrum. But I think often people, let's just say addicts and people with certain identifiable characteristics, can recognize such behavior in other people when they're acting out publicly. I hear that all the time. I don't think I'm good at that. I try not to do that anyway, but I do. But it's Don Jr., so I'm fine with it. And do you, just real quick before you go back to you, are you observing, like, I don't pay too close attention to him because I get so triggered by his voice and even more by his face. But what are you seeing with that guy? Because people make all these jokes about how coked up he is. But Jay, I swear to God, and people make fun of me for this, which is fine, I've never seen cocaine. I don't really know much about cocaine and the behaviors that come with it. But do you really think that dude is doing a lot of drugs?
Well, I'll say this, because I was a stimulant guy. And Adderall, which got prescribed to me at 15 milligrams IR, quickly became, 120 milligrams a day. Wow. So yeah, I know I could vibrate through time. I mean, that's where I was at. Like I could look through the corridor of 26 dimensions at once. I'll say that Donald Trump 100% exhibits
Junior.
So elder Trump. He exhibits so many Adderall traits to me. Yeah. And I know it's been rumored that he's on some kind of stimulant for weight loss since the 90s. I see it so much with him that just the breathing and the dry mouth and the way his hours used to keep on Twitter. Like, I would think to myself, my God, if this were me, everyone would think I was back.
Do you know this guy, Noel Kasler?
Yeah. Oh, I follow him. He's great.
Yeah, he's been on the show, and I met him just through virtually. But he's got some of the receipts. He at least seemingly says about seeing the behavior as a producer on The Apprentice. Let's get fuck Don and Junior and their addictions. Back to you. What was the bottom for you? How openly do you talk about this?
So yeah, the bottom was 2016. I was like, we all sort of have suicidal ideation. I think, I was in that mindset of like, all of a sudden the world would be better without me. And, this is why I advocate very much for nobody having guns around ever. Cause like, if I had easy access to an easy way out, I feel like I probably would have taken it. But like the only saving grace that I had is what a poor planner I am, because there's like so many different things. I got to get a rope. How am I going to do that? And my wife and I had been having some trouble, and, she basically looked at me and was like, "You're sick." And the biggest problem I ran into was the gap between I need to go to a therapist once a week to talk about I didn't get enough hugs versus I need a full-time mental hospital. There's not a lot of in between, because I didn't think I needed to be put into, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I knew I needed more than just hey, tell me about your mom. I needed something in between. And luckily I found it. But I had to go into a mental hospital first for 3 days. I was in there for 3 days going, I got to tell you a quick story, just real fast about this.
Yeah.
I go into the mental hospital because I go to the Princeton house, like right near me, and they're like, "Are you here for suicidal thoughts?" And I was like, "Well, who is it?" And they're like, "You got to get in. Come on." So I'm in, and very quickly I realized this isn't for me. There's like a woman who yells at me like, "I can't hear you over my teeth," like real kind of like, stuff where I'm sensitive to it, but not me. I go in, and my intake, the guy who intakes me like says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a comedian and I'm a screenwriter." And he's like, "Oh, sure." And he writes that down. Next day I'm in line at lunch, and he goes, "Hey, you have an IMDb." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I know." And he was like, No. Nobody has. I've done this for 30 years. Everybody says they do the movies when they're like not psycho. What do you call it? When they're on the upswing, what's the manic phase? When they're in the manic phase, they all think they do that. You're literally my first one who's ever had an IMDb. That's amazing. So he walks away, and I swear to God, there's a guy sitting over there, and he's like, "You in the movies?" And I'm like, "Well, kinda." And he's like, "I was in Top Gun."
What?
Yeah, no, he wasn't. He just was one of the people they talked about. I was like, all right.
I didn't get that. I definitely cycled through in under a second who that could have been. I was like, Is it Mark, the guy from ER?
Yeah, it's Anthony Edwards, everybody.
Is it Anthony Edwards?
He's in a psych ward in New Jersey.
Wow.
So yeah, I was in there for 3 days, and they finally got me into outpatient. And the thing that saved me, honestly, was group therapy, because comedians are really good at talking, and we are not very good at listening. At least real, like, present listening, where you have to empathize with somebody else. And I remember, 4 weeks.
What was that?
Yeah,
I'm watching my birds.
Yeah, I did the same joke with my wife today. She didn't get it. She's like, I think if you ever did a podcast, Jay, don't do an interview because you're not a good listener. And I was like, huh? And she repeated herself just flat out. And I was like, honey, I'm joking. But no, we're not good listeners. And I think about 4 weeks into group therapy, like the glacier kind of moved in my head. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, these people have so many problems. And I felt so bad for them. It was a relief to not be in my own head, self-pitying myself, if that makes any sense to you.
It makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't, it's not something that I think that you would ever even imagine happening until you stepped into that room and heard from those people. Most of us don't ever make that choice voluntarily. Yeah. And so basically, but you get a perspective of all these other people who have similar or worse issues. And somehow, what does that make you feel?
Empathy. It's the empathy of, like, I think a lot of times especially if you're at that point of self-hatred and anger at yourself, you can't feel any kind of real sympathy for yourself. You can feel pity, which is different than sympathy, but you can't feel sympathy for yourself. And it's easier to kind of direct it to somebody who has a problem similar to you. And you start to really feel for them, and you go, you should forgive yourself. You find yourself saying that in group therapy, like, you need to forgive yourself. And then it's like the eureka moment of, like, maybe I need to forgive myself. It's like a very kind of interesting way of self-care by caring for others, if that makes any sense.
It all makes a lot of sense. When was this? Where? I feel like everything, like things like this, life experiences like this, these crucible moments, well, more likely a gradual, I suppose, progression of your emotional state and the way you felt about things. But I feel like these types of experiences now have to be explained with the correspondence of when, in relation to the pandemic, did this happen? Because
this was
just quickly, losing my job at SiriusXM was when I was broken, when I was in the suck for the first time in my life. And when the pandemic broke out, it gave me a perspective that it sounds like kind of group therapy gave you, in terms of a lot of people now dealing. I now knew what it felt like to deal with loss of job, income, depression, anxiety, daily feelings of not wanting to live anymore. And then the pandemic changed that for me for the better in a lot, because it helped me create a community of people, which it sounds like you get similar benefits from with group therapy. But going back to the timing of it all for you.
This was all Trump 2016. So it all, like, I look at, like, and it's funny because I know if you're a conservative and listening, you're going to say, oh, the libs, they hate him so much. It wasn't that. My life was falling apart irrespective of Donald Trump. But his election coincided with my hospitalization. And, to sort of see the country fall into a negative place at the same time I was falling into a negative place, it felt like my problems were bigger somehow, because the country was going through them at the same time I was. And I sort of chart the course of my own recovery with sort of coming to terms with the fact that, okay, there's some things about the country I can't change either. Maybe it's okay to laugh at, go back on Twitter and laugh at some of this stuff instead of feeling it so deeply. But, in a lot of ways, seeing Joe get elected this past year really did feel like the culmination of 4 years of work internally here. I know that sounds weird, but it really does
It does not sound weird. It doesn't sound weird. It might sound weird to say it out loud the way that you said it, but I think when I heard it and everybody that listens to this hears it, they know exactly what you're saying, because we all went on some kind of similar journey as a result of the election of Donald Trump, and as it corresponds with whatever's going on in your life or your career or your marriage or your health. I mean, all that stuff is obviously connected. But let me ask you, what was it about? Were you inherently political? I mean, I was watching some old clips of your stand-up before Trump was elected, and you used to be like, clearly you had a lot of political opinions, but you seemingly chose, as I have, to not divide the audience with political opinions and to kind of just make fun of politics and life in general. But you've always been a progressive guy. It was stand to reason.
Yeah, I was the son of a Reagan Democrat who fell down the foxhole in the early 2000s. And as he got more conservative, my dad, I'm talking about, I got... I was always down the middle. I have gotten more and more progressive in relation to the way the world has moved. And it's sort of like stuff that you took for granted in the 90s, which is everybody's the same and deserves respect, is suddenly a radical position. Like I never thought of that as progressive, well, nobody should go hungry. That's not progressive. It's suddenly like, well, look at this guy, the leftist of the world. And I feel like the world maybe has shifted right, and I've only moved to the left a little bit, if that makes any sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think people will have their own perspective on whatever that window is. But what was it then about for you? About Trump's election? Was there anything specific that you were most concerned about, or that triggered the other things that were happening in your life that sent you to the point where you had to be hospitalized?
So, the hospitalization was all internal stuff that I needed to work through, and getting better was all about that. With regards to Trump, there was an actual depression that set in, like I said before, about this idea of reality not being there anymore. Like this, it's funny. The whole universe our universe is based on shared lies or shared assumptions. What's money except everybody deciding at the same time that this has value? And those things are necessary for a society to work, right?
Same goes for Bitcoin.
Right, exactly. Everything that exists, government is just a whole group of people coming together and going, we're going to listen to those guys for 4 years and then we're going to move on. All of that. And the second I could see Trump attacking the shared assumptions that people made, that's when I started to get real scared and real depressed, because once we don't have a commonality of reality, I have no way of interacting with you in any kind of meaningful way. It's no longer a difference of opinion. It's a different of universe. We're in a multiverse of bad ideas.
So well said. Have you had experiences that you can think of? Do you have, is your dad still with us?
No, my dad passed about a year and a half before I went through my whole whirly-durl. My dad and brother died about 5 months apart in 2013 and then 2014 for my brother. My dad died in September. My brother died in February.
What happened to your brother?
So my brother was an alcoholic, a bad alcoholic, and 3 years prior to his death,
older, younger,
younger but bigger. I'm 6'3", he's 6'7", or was 6'7". He's a giant of a man. Very John Fetterman, my brother. In fact, when I look at John Fetterman, I go, that's maybe my brother's. He, changed his identity and moved to Pennsylvania.
Wow. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, he had drank himself into a coma 10 years ago, and he got out of the coma and he got sober. So he got about 3 years of life without the booze. And the weird thing is he got a hernia, and they didn't want to operate on him because his liver was so beat up from the alcoholism. And the hernia was pressing on a congenital defect in the bowel. It ripped open. He went septic and died. So it was like one of those things. I was doing a gig in the UP up in Michigan for Mr. Rob Jockel, performing in the UP at a college. And my brother called me and said, my back hurts. And that night he was dead, or brain dead. And then he died the next day. It was like back hurt to death in like 36 hours. It's crazy.
How long ago was that?
This was 7 years ago yesterday. So, yeah, it was. And then, of course, I go, the best way to respond to a brother dying of an alcohol-related disease is to booze and drug up as much as possible. Because, again, we're all living the cliche, Pete.
So how are you doing now? I mean, comedy is obviously really important to you. I can see how important comedy is to you. I've always seen that with a guy like you. And you've had a really great career and done some really exciting things. I remember seeing you. Didn't I see you at the White House Correspondents' Dinner with Kevin Nealon?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was. But we were in D.C. It probably was about 2015 or so.
Yeah, I just remember thinking that it was awesome that you were there and that you were with him and you were continuing to just have a great career in comedy. The way I define a great career in comedy, and it's pretty simple that you just keep getting better at it. And but the pandemic takes that away from you. Where were you at with your career in terms of doing what you wanted to do, as much as you wanted to do it, the work and the gigs and the type of work, and how have you been doing in the last, over a year since live comedy shut down?
So in a lot of ways, Pete, I am 100% the cause of the pandemic, because in early February, I was looking at my schedule and I was like, this is the most booked with good gigs I have ever been. I turned to my wife. I was like, this couldn't be better. I'm killing it. And then shut down. So it was a blow to lose all that. But three things happened that really helped me through. One is, I was always a dad that was a binary dad, in the sense that I was gone for a week and not a dad. And then I'd be home for a week and I was dad, like big time. Like I'm doing everything. And then I'm gone for a week again. To kind of like my wife and I to actually share responsibility in raising our children has been a delight. That's a new experience for both of us.
That's great.
I've been doing stand up. The second thing is I've been writing screenplays, not to brag, but I am the writer of Lifetime's Psycho Yoga Instructor. Fourth lead, Steve Hofstetter, our mutual friend, is in that movie.
He's in it?
Steve's like my good luck charm. I put him in every movie I produce if I can. He's playing a cop in the latest movie that's filming right now, which, if you know anything about Steve's Twitter, him playing a cop is the funniest thing you could imagine.
I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that. I follow him on Twitter. I love Steve Hofstetter. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's one of the most progressive guys on Twitter.
He's critical of law enforcement, and so you cast him as an actual cop. And
it's kind of funny to see him as a cop, like in the uniform. All of his followers are like, "What's going on here?"
That's great.
I've amped up the writing, so I think I have 3 movies that are going to be premiering this year. Again, Lifetime and Hallmark and stuff like that, but pays the bills. But the third thing is Twitter. Having Twitter back in my life and treating it as a job rather than any kind of emotional connection has been wonderful, because, again, we talked at the very beginning, getting to be clever in public is the whole reason we do this. I have an idea, let me share it immediately. I've been enjoying that greatly.
Well, I'm so glad to hear all of that. And again, follow Jay on Twitter, and you can get all the links to everything in the show notes, they say.
The show notes,
yeah. At Jay Black is funny on Twitter. But do you think, given what you've learned through this experience and what you're describing as, jointly parenting, co-parenting, being there at the same time with your wife, being there more with your kids, how do you feel about where we go from here? Will you get back out on the road as much as you did, or will you do more writing?
So the joke I've been saying when I do gigs is even my kids want me gone. Like my son came up to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I just re-listened to Cats in the Cradle, and as it turns out, I think that kid turned out okay. So if you want to go,
no way, that's a funny kid."
Yeah, I honestly think that being forced to focus on the movie side has sort of jump-started that part of the career, so I don't have to travel as much. And the hope is, luckily being in the Northeast, there's a lot of gigs that we can get to that are 3-4 hours away and be home that night. So I feel like I'm going to be concentrating on those, assuming there's a comedy industry when we come back, Pete, because I don't know if there is.
Live performance, let's call it. So, theater from Broadway to off-Broadway, music from jazz clubs to, orchestras and comedy from theaters to little comedy clubs. I feel like the question is, audience members, do people want to go sit next to other people? And you kind of have to be next to other people with comedy. It works better. I think that's the question we're asking is, will audiences show up? What's the question that you're asking? Will it be allowed? What are you concerned about in terms of the future of live performance?
So there's a couple issues. One is, I think what you just said, will audience members be comfortable with it? I think we're probably a year out from now before it really starts coming back, because I think we're going to need 6 to 8 months with the vaccine before people aren't afraid anymore.
I mean, don't you think the question is, how big of a name are you? How much do your fans love you? Like, I feel like Joe Coy's fans would not care about COVID because they love him so much. And I feel like 10 of mine would show up 20 feet apart. But I mean, the question, because I am being serious to some extent, is like, some people aren't worried about COVID and they are huge fans of this artist, and it could be music, it could be anything, and they'll just show up. So I think that, certain states, certain performers, I don't know. I'm just trying to add on.
I mean, I think certainly the political bent, guys like Tim Dillon or Joe Rogan or, even Chappelle. I mean, their fans are sort of actively dismissing COVID to a certain degree.
Right.
And I think that there's a political statement that they're making by showing up to their gigs
for sure,
that our fans will not do, because we're going to push them in the other direction, which is come when it's safe. But I do worry that if the clubs, when the clubs disappear because of this, that's bad for us. But the clubs that remain, I think we're going to see an influx of celebrities back out on the road for a while that's going to push out guys at our level. Not to say that you're not a huge celebrity, Pete, because obviously you are. But, guys, SNL guys or TV guys that are going to look to make money quick because they were hurt by this too. I worry that they're going to go out and take up all the slots for a year. So it's going to be 2 years before I'm really going to be back in the swing like I was before.
Have you thought about, I'm planning on doing this, have you thought about one gig, 50 tickets, $5,000 a piece covers the year? Have you considered, because I've sold 4 tickets. No. Not a
yeah, listen, I will open for you. I just give me a cut. That's all I want.
I'll open for you, Jay Black. I don't want to have to follow your fucking act.
Hey, listen, can I just say, you've been saying so many nice things about me. I have followed your career. When you got to Sirius XM, and you became this, you were the central political guy. You weren't too left, too right. But I was like, this is great. When I saw you on Real Time, I felt like you remember the stand-up documentary about stand-ups in Boston and how excited they all were when they saw Stephen Wright on The Tonight Show? That's how I felt when I saw you on Real Time, because I was like, yeah, Pete, that's awesome. And to see you build this podcasting platform for yourself and what you've done on Twitter, it's just, I'm so proud of you, Pete. This is great.
Well, I that means a lot to me, and I'm psyched to hear about your personal journey. And, I never had any doubts, obviously, about your career. I always thought, well, Jay Black's a really hardworking guy. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. But it's hard with a family to balance all this and your priorities. But I sure do appreciate you coming on and being so. I didn't expect you to. I didn't know that you had gone through. I knew that I saw that you tweeted about losing your father and your dad, and I really wanted to talk with you about that. But I didn't know about your own kind of personal journey there. And I'm psyched that you shared it with us, because so many people appreciate hearing. I mean, what we just did is, to some extent, group therapy for a lot of folks listening, feeling, seen and heard, if not to sound too corny. But let's just real quick at the end, I did want to make sure we got to your email address, which I found. Just wanted to real quick address this. You have, I don't know if you want to say publicly what your email address is. If you want to give it out, you could be swarmed by my listeners, my community. But there are
I'll give it out.
Okay, what is your email address?
So
don't explain. No, you can defend it after you say.
Pete, it's indefensible.
Just say let's not just say the email address.
It's j.black.business.email at Gmail. And
I don't
right
know
about the time,
I just don't know which dot infuriates me the most. Like, I'm so triggered. I was so triggered when I saw it. You DM'd me. I go, hey, send me your email, and you couldn't even send it right because the algorithms, whatever, if you put a dot next to something, it highlights it, which makes your life horrible. It makes my life horrible. But then I was like, well, there must be some mistake because he wrote dot email, and no person of intelligence or education or thoughtfulness or humanity would do that. And I was like, well, there must be a mistake. So, yeah, go ahead and just briefly explain why on earth you would do that to yourself and to others.
So when I was getting my email address, I wanted to have my name.
You were at the place where they hand them out.
I was at the place. I was in line. I got in line late, which was a mistake. So I honestly,
especially when your name is J. Black.
Yeah, I was like, how many of us could there be? So I put in JAY.BLACK, and I was like, that's my email address. Boop, taken. So I was like, well, I'm going to use this for business. I know what I'll do. J.black.business. Taken, Pete. Yep. Who would take, what kind of lunatic takes that? So then I was like, well, is J.black.business.email taken? It was not. So I went with that, and then it stuck. And I regret it every day. Anytime I have to be on the phone and they say, what's your email address? I have to preface it with, you're going to think I'm making this up. I'm not.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just be clear. It's probably lost you both work and friends. And certainly it's damaged your travel itineraries, I'd imagine. But the question a lot of people want to know right now is why not just save yourself and everybody else trouble and come up with a new email address that wouldn't create so many headaches and so many real issues for people?
So, Pete, may I just tell a quick story, real fast?
Yeah.
There's a legend of the Gordian knot. Have you ever heard the legend of the Gordian knot?
I can't recall it.
It was this knot that was the most complicated knot in the world. And they said, whoever unties this knot will go on to rule the world. Right. And people came from all around and no one could do it because it was too complex. And then one day, a young boy comes up, cuts the knot in half with his sword. And that boy was Alexander the Great, who went on to rule the world. Pete, you just cut my Gordian knot. I'm going to get a new email address. That was a long way of saying, you cut the knot, Pete.
Well, if that's what comes of this conversation today, then I've done my service for the week, for the whole week.
Oh, for the year. You'd retire right now. You can actually write this off for $500,000 in charity, what you just did right now, because of how much it's going to affect my life positively.
Thank you for talking to me today. I really enjoyed it. J. Black, everybody.
Thank you, Pete. Pleasure to be on. Thanks, buddy.
How about that, everybody? I got him to change his email address, which was the only goal I had going in. Oh, that and having a super deep, thoughtful, honest, and vulnerable conversation with tones of lightness and hilarity. Yeah, I think we nailed it. J. Black. At J. Black is funny. Now, if you're still listening, I'd love to get your feedback because I opened the show and want to end the show with I opened the show saying this is what I want to do with every day's episode ideally, and today I close it by saying I hope I did that, and I'd love to know what you think about that kind of conversation, and if that's something you'd like to hear more of and who I could be having that conversation with. Maybe it's you. There are some awesome, amazing, fascinating, brilliant, hilarious folks who listen to and subscribe to this show, many of which you've actually heard on it. And there's been several of you that I really want to catch up with and talk to. But if there's something that you do and want to talk about that you're an expert on, from teaching to welding to music, well, you know I can't talk about music, but I could probably plow through something with you. I'd love to hear from you. So give me an email, drop me a line, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Hope to see you tonight at our hangout. That is tonight at 8 East on Zoom. And I may have a guest or two. I'm going to reach out to a couple of people. That's all for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Support me on the patreon.com/PeteDominic. Did I already say that? I think I'm done. I'm tired. I'm tight. Time to go to bed and post this baby up. Send me your pictures, by the way. I'm still talking. Send me your nature pictures. Vitamin N. I open every day's email to listener subscribers with a picture from nature submitted by listeners. So send those over, and I'd love to see them and share them. Okay, now really, I'm actually wrapping up. Singer-songwriter Aaron Carroll, take it out for us, buddy.
When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the seat of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Oh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
And now here's a clip from HLN in 2016, where I was on a panel remotely with Diamond and Silk. And when they got done ranting and raving, well, one did. The other one in the frame was just saying, and yup. And they got done. My friend Susan Hendricks, who I love, the anchor, threw it to me, and I had no idea what to do. Listen.
Trump, so they're doing anything to smear him because they fear him. That's what they're doing.
Is there anything, guys, that Trump could do or say that would turn you off from his campaign or his antics, as some would call it? Is there anything, or he's perfect in your eyes and you're going to go ahead and vote for Trump no matter what?
Listen, I don't call him antics. He speaks truth.
That's right.
People don't want to hear the truth. We need a border. Would you have your house unlocked? No, don't you secure your house? Our borders need to be secure. Our jobs need to be brought back. And Clinton and Bernie is part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. They've been in office all of these years, and not one time have they cared about jobs. Look at those people up in Michigan. Look at right here, our manufacturing right here in North Carolina. Not one time have they done anything. So now that they talk about do something.
I know you're passionate, and you're like many Trump supporters, you're angry and passionate. Pete, what is your take?
I don't know where we found these two ladies, but have they heard of Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, or Andrew Young? Would you like to see, should they have been arrested? Because they use similar tactics as the anti-Trump protesters. It's bizarre to hear them say these things because it's so un-American. This is what we do.
They don't stand alone. A lot of Trump supporters feel the same way.
Yeah, but if you're being consistent, you would say that about Gandhi, about Dr. Martin Luther King, about the civil rights protesters who did all kinds of things that, yes, they were actually illegal, but they changed the world, and we look back at them as heroes, and I look at these protesters in the same way. But these ladies want to see people like Dr. King, people following the footsteps of the civil rights leader of the last generation, put in jail. That's sad to me.
All right, we have to run. I know we could go on for a long time. Diamond itself, Pete Dominic, Nomi Kantz, thank you so much for this discussion.
Susan Hendricks, if you're listening, thank you for offering me that very amazing opportunity in my career. I love you. And I love all of you. Goodbye.